The air vibrated with a hopeful hum, a collective sigh of achievement exhaled by thousands gathered under the sprawling, arched roof of the university arena. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, painted soft golden stripes across the sea of beaming faces, each one reflecting a unique tapestry of pride, relief, and boundless anticipation. The scent of freshly laundered robes mingled with the faint aroma of coffee and nervous excitement, a uniquely academic blend that, surprisingly, brought a lump to Thomas's throat. For Sergeant Major Thomas Hammer Henderson, USMC, retired, every single molecule of that joyous atmosphere felt profoundly earned, not just by the hundreds of brilliant young minds about to cross the stage, each a testament to years of dedication, discipline, and late-night intellectual struggle, but by the one who mattered most to him, the one who was the very core of his post-military life, his son, Marcus Henderson. The name itself was a melody of triumph in Thomas's mind, resonating with every beat of his heart. He felt a familiar swell in his chest, a sensation akin to the steady, unyielding pride he'd felt seeing his Marines perform flawlessly under pressure, executing a complex maneuver with breathtaking precision under enemy fire. But this was profoundly, fundamentally different. This was familial, deeply personal, a quiet triumph woven not from the grit of the battlefield, but from years of sacrifices, the countless late-night study sessions where Thomas, despite his exhaustion from a demanding military career, would sit patiently with Marcus, offering silent support, a strong cup of cocoa, or patiently guiding him through a particularly thorny calculus problem until the early hours. It was built on the sacrifices of a single father, countless missed social events, personal hobbies deferred, all channeled into fostering Marcus's relentless, almost obsessive, drive for excellence. Thomas watched his son, a sharp, lean silhouette among the graduating class in their flowing black robes, a vibrant splash of academic regalia, the distinctive crimson and gold hood of the School of Engineering draped proudly around his neck. Marcus was easy to spot, not just because Thomas had practically memorized the back of his head, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape, but because there was a certain confident tilt to Marcus's shoulders, a subtle energy, a quiet determination that always set him apart. He was a mirror in some ways, reflecting Thomas's own quiet strength and unyielding resolve, but refined by a different kind of crucible, the challenging, intellectually rigorous academic one, where battles were fought with equations and theories, not bullets and bombs. "He's done it, son," Thomas murmured, the words barely audible above the rising crescendo of chatter, the excited whispers, and the distant cheers, though Marcus was too far to hear him. The words were for himself, a quiet, almost spiritual acknowledgement of the arduous journey they had both embarked upon, side by side, even when physically separated by continents and duties. Thomas, a man whose life had been meticulously defined by rigid discipline, the unforgiving roar of combat in distant, desolate lands, and the quiet camaraderie of brothers in arms forged in the crucible of fire, found himself surprisingly sentimental. A warmth, unfamiliar in its intensity, spread through his chest, a comforting balm that eased the usual military stoicism he'd worn like a second skin for decades. His hand instinctively, almost unconsciously, reached up to touch the brim of his perfectly creased, dark blue Marine Corps League cap, adorned with the iconic eagle, globe, and anchor emblem, painstakingly polished even for this ostensibly civilian event. It wasn't his dress blues, no. Those were reserved for formal military functions, for parades and official ceremonies where his rank demanded a certain reverence. Today was unequivocally about Marcus, not about him, not about his past glories or the medals quietly resting in a velvet box at home. But the cap was a small, silent, deeply significant testament to the values he'd instilled: honor, integrity, perseverance, excellence, and above all, pride in oneself, one's heritage, and one's country. Values Marcus had clearly embraced in his relentless pursuit of higher education. It was a humble nod to his identity, a respectful presence in a sea of civilian celebration, a quiet, unwavering declaration of who he was and what he represented. The uniform might have been retired, folded away neatly in a footlocker, but the heart of a Marine and the unwavering pride of a father beat just as strong, perhaps even stronger, today. He stood near the edge of the main aisle, a little further back than most, preferring to observe the grand spectacle unfold rather than be swallowed by the jostling, excitable crowd that surged forward and back like an eager tide. The arena was vast, its circular design amplifying the murmur of excited chatter and the occasional burst of parental cheers that echoed off the high, acoustically engineered ceilings. The air hummed with anticipation, a sweet melody of futures unfolding, of dreams taking flight, a symphony of success. Ushers, mostly polite student volunteers in bright yellow sashes, moved with practiced ease, their expressions a mix of helpfulness and slight harriedness as they guided families to their designated seating areas, navigating the human currents. Thomas had arrived early, as always, a habit ingrained from years of meticulous mission planning and unwavering operational readiness, securing a spot with a clear, unobstructed view of the stage where Marcus would soon walk, a spot that allowed him both sight and a sense of strategic control. He hadn't wanted to navigate the dense throngs too much, his years in the Corps teaching him the wisdom of strategic positioning in crowded environments, always maintaining unparalleled situational awareness, a mental map of exits, potential choke points, and lines of sight. He'd arrived early, but not early enough to secure a prime seat in the lower tiers, closer to the action, where grandmothers wept openly, clutching tissues, and fathers clapped with tear-filled eyes, their voices hoarse with joy. That was perfectly fine. He didn't need to be front row. His quiet pride didn't demand a spotlight or public recognition. His satisfaction was internal, profound. He just needed to see Marcus, to witness that pivotal, unforgettable moment when his son would cross the threshold into the next chapter of his life, a chapter Thomas had helped write with his unwavering support. The view from his current vantage point, a slightly elevated spot near an access ramp, was absolutely perfect. He could take in the entire tableau, the grand stage adorned with the university's shimmering crest, the orderly rows of graduating students, their identical black robes a stark contrast to their individually chosen, colorful academic hoods, like a vibrant mosaic, and the proud families below, phones held aloft like beacons, ready to capture memories that would last a lifetime. A profound sense of peace settled over him, a rare calm that permeated his usually vigilant mind. It was then that a security guard, a burly man in a crisp, slightly too tight uniform that strained across his broad shoulders, with event staff emblazoned prominently on his arm, approached. His walk was a little too purposeful, a little too heavy-footed, a jarring presence in the otherwise celebratory, light-hearted mood. Thomas, accustomed to assessing threats with a glance, an instantaneous calculation of danger, registered him as an anomaly in the generally jovial atmosphere. His senses, honed by decades of vigilance in unpredictable, often hostile environments, picked up on the subtle shift in the air around the man. A tension, an almost aggressive readiness, a coiled energy that seemed utterly out of place in a university auditorium. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said, his voice surprisingly deep, cutting through the pleasant murmur with an almost aggressive efficiency. a tone more suited to a military checkpoint than a civilian celebration. His eyes, though fixed on Thomas, seemed to scan him with an almost dismissive air. "Are you with a group? You seem to be loitering in an unauthorized area." Thomas turned, a polite, almost imperceptible nod. His expression was calm, neutral, revealing nothing of his immediate internal assessment, nothing of the prickle of discomfort that had just begun. "No, officer, just here for my son's graduation, Marcus Henderson. He's graduating today from the School of Engineering." He offered the information plainly, seeking to clarify any misunderstanding, to establish his legitimate presence. The guard, Officer Miller, a name Thomas mentally noted, glanced briefly at Thomas's cap, his eyes lingering for a fraction longer on the Marine Corps emblem, the globe and anchor that represented service across the world, a symbol of honor, before darting to Thomas's face. His gaze then lingered for a fraction longer on Thomas's dark skin, a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of something unreadable, perhaps suspicion, perhaps mild disdain, perhaps just ingrained prejudice, before flicking quickly away, as if caught in an impropriety. It was a micro-expression, easily missed by most, but Thomas, a man who had navigated racial prejudice his entire life, who had seen it in countless forms from subtle glances to overt acts of aggression, registered it immediately, its meaning painfully clear. "Here we go," he thought, a familiar, weary acknowledgement settling in his gut, a silent sigh he didn't utter. "All right, just ensuring everyone's in their designated areas. This isn't a seating section, sir. You'll need to move along." His tone was now firm, devoid of any pleasantries, hardening with an unspoken resolve. Thomas looked around again, allowing his gaze to sweep over the broad, open area. The space was indeed an access point, a wide, open corridor designed for ingress and egress, a clear path for movement, but at this exact moment, it was not currently obstructing anyone or anything. He observed several other individuals standing similarly, chatting quietly amongst themselves, or waiting patiently for family members to pass by, or simply taking in the grand scale of the arena, their faces alight with pride. He noted, without judgment, but with keen and immediate awareness, that they, unlike him, were mostly white, their casual postures entirely unchallenged, their conversations uninterrupted. The thought was fleeting, dismissed almost as quickly as it arose, a flicker of doubt. Perhaps he's just doing his job. Perhaps it's just standard procedure. Don't jump to conclusions, Henderson. Give him the benefit of the doubt until he proves otherwise. "Understood, officer," Thomas replied calmly, his voice even, a lifetime of maintaining composure under extreme duress, in situations where a single wrong word or a hasty movement could mean life or death, serving him well. The Marine in him understood rules and regulations, the necessity of order, the importance of compliance with legitimate authority. "I'm not blocking anything, as you can see. There's ample room for passage. I'm just observing before the ceremony formally begins." He gestured subtly to the clear, wide path behind him, emphasizing the lack of obstruction. "Still, sir, health and safety regulations, fire codes. You can't stand here. You need to keep moving. Find a seat," Miller reiterated, his voice gaining a clear edge of impatience, of forced exasperation. He gestured vaguely towards the packed stands, an impossible task at this stage of the ceremony. The seats were almost entirely full, a vibrant, unyielding mosaic of celebratory attire, with not an empty space in sight. The implication was clear, heavy, with unspoken intent. Leave or face the consequences. Thomas raised an eyebrow slightly, a tiny tremor of annoyance, a flicker of indignation running through his veins, quickly suppressed. His patience, honed by years of waiting out snipers in dusty, war-torn villages and enduring bureaucratic nonsense in brightly lit Pentagon offices, was vast, almost boundless. "Officer, I was under the impression that the open areas, like this one, were explicitly designated for temporary standing, especially during peak ingress and egress times like this. There are others standing here as well, perhaps waiting for family. Why single me out? Is there a specific issue with my presence?" He didn't accuse, he merely questioned, his tone inviting a logical professional response, demanding a reason beyond arbitrary enforcement. "I'm talking to you, sir, not them." Miller's tone had hardened noticeably, a hint of steel entering it, now laced with a thinly veiled impatience and a palpable undertone of personal animosity. A clear shift from professional duty to something more personal. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed with an unnerving intensity. "Look, I'm just doing my job. These are the university's rules. You need to find a seat, or you'll have to leave the premises immediately. Those are the rules, plain and simple, and I enforce them for everyone." The last part felt like a transparent lie, given the others standing unmolested. Thomas felt a familiar prickle of irritation, a tiny ember of the hammer stirring within him, a deep-seated frustration with arbitrary authority, with thinly disguised prejudice masquerading as policy. But he extinguished it just as quickly. Today was not about proving points or asserting dominance, not about engaging in a petty power struggle with an overzealous rent-a-cop who clearly had an agenda. Today was about Marcus Henderson, about witnessing his son's hard-earned moment of glory, a moment that could not be tainted by such trivialities. "Very well, officer, I'll find a seat." He started to move, slowly, deliberately, his gaze sweeping over the sea of heads, scanning the distant rows with a feigned effort, knowing full well there were no empty seats to be found. It was a polite retreat, a tactical disengagement, designed to de-escalate the situation, to offer the guard an easy win without compromising his own dignity. But before he could take more than a few steps, before the minimal distance could be created, another guard, younger, leaner, and with an air of self-importance that practically dripped from his pressed uniform, appeared almost magically beside Miller. This was Officer Davis, and he seemed to relish the unfolding drama, his eyes bright with a hungry, almost predatory glint, a silent partner in Miller's aggression. "Is there a problem here, Miller?" Davis asked, his voice sharp, immediately drawing focus, his eyes already assessing Thomas with a critical, disdainful gaze. His gaze, even before Miller responded, also immediately snagged on Thomas's cap, then settled on his face with an unnervingly direct, almost contemptuous stare. His eyes were cold, calculating, and seemed to hold an instant, preconceived judgment, a prejudice already formed. His stare felt less like an assessment and more like an accusation, a verdict already passed without trial or evidence. "Just a gentleman who needs to find a seat, Davis," Miller replied, a slight smirk playing on his lips, a subtle shift in his demeanor now that he had backup. He puffed his chest slightly, emboldened, as if Thomas's reluctant compliance, however forced, was a small, satisfying victory they could share, a shared triumph over an unwelcome presence. He exchanged a knowing glance with Davis, a silent communication that spoke volumes, a shared understanding that Thomas, by virtue of his skin and his cap, was the problem. Thomas stopped, his movement ceasing instantly, his body becoming still, turning fully to face them. 2 against 1. He wasn't threatened, not in the slightest. His life had placed him in far more perilous situations, facing adversaries armed with far more than badges and inflated egos. But the air had shifted definitively, growing thick with unspoken hostility. The initial veneer of professional courtesy had completely evaporated, replaced by something overtly charged, a palpable tension that hummed between the three men, a silent battle of wills. "I am in the process of finding one, officer," Thomas stated, his voice still low, but now carrying the quiet, unwavering authority of a man who had commanded thousands, a tone that brooked no argument in a combat zone, a voice that could quell panic and inspire courage in the most dire circumstances. "I'm attending my son's graduation, Marcus Henderson. He's graduating from the School of Engineering, with honors. I intend to see him graduate." He added the last part, a quiet assertion of the significance of the day, a subtle plea for understanding, for basic human decency. Davis scoffed, a short, dismissive sound that was deeply insulting, a sneer twisting his lips, a clear sign of contempt. "Right, and that hat. Is that even allowed in here? This is a university graduation, not a recruitment center, sir." The sarcasm on Sir was heavy, dripping with contempt and barely concealed derision, meant to strip Thomas of his dignity, to belittle his service, to diminish him. "It's distracting. We've had complaints. It's an eyesore." The fabricated nature of the complaints was becoming glaringly obvious. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his patience now being tested by a fool, a greenhorn who clearly had no concept of respect or decorum, no understanding of the gravity of the cap he wore. "It's a respectful show of pride, officer," he stated, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble, a sound that promised consequences if pushed further. "This is a Marine Corps League cap. I served this country for 30 years. I am a retired Sergeant Major of the United States Marine Corps. That cap represents my dedication, my sacrifice, my very identity." He paused, letting the immense weight of that statement hang in the air, allowing his rank and years of selfless service to speak for themselves, hoping it would cut through their thick-headed prejudice. "I've earned the right to wear this cap anywhere I choose, especially at my son's graduation, where I celebrate his achievement built on the foundation of the very freedoms I protected, the freedoms you ostensibly served to protect." "Served, huh?" Davis's eyes narrowed, unconvinced or perhaps willfully ignorant, determined to find fault, to remain in their self-righteous bubble of authority. He exchanged another meaningful look with Miller, a clear sign of mutual disdain, a silent agreement to escalate. "Look, we've had issues with unauthorized personnel, people trying to cause trouble, disruptive elements, and frankly, that cap, it's not standard dress. It's a formal event. It stands out. It's unprofessional. It's drawing too much attention." The absurdity of their argument was becoming apparent even to a few nearby spectators. "It's a graduation," Thomas corrected, a calm defiance entering his tone, his voice a steady counterpoint to Davis's rising anger, a beacon of reason. "A joyous, public ceremony, open to all, celebrating academic achievement. And there are no rules, written or unwritten, that prohibit a veteran from wearing a military service cap. Many veterans wear them to events like this, as a mark of respect and pride, a living tradition that connects generations of service. It's a symbol of honor, not disruption. The only disruption is your insistence on harassing me." He was speaking facts, educating, asserting his rights, not challenging their authority in a volatile way, but rather exposing its baselessness. But to Davis, it seemed, facts were a direct challenge to his perceived, flimsy authority, a personal affront that could not be tolerated. "I'm telling you, sir, it's causing a disruption," Davis declared, puffing out his chest slightly, attempting to appear larger, more intimidating, his face growing red with exertion. His voice rose, sharp and accusatory, drawing more attention from the surrounding onlookers who were now openly staring. "People are noticing. It's not appropriate. We've had multiple complaints about your presence in that cap. You're making a spectacle of yourself." The last part was clearly a fabricated lie, a flimsy excuse designed to justify their discriminatory actions, a desperate attempt to shift blame. Thomas's eyes swept the immediate area once more, a quick, efficient scan. No one was noticing them until Davis raised his voice, his accusations loud and unprovoked, echoing slightly in the vast space. Everyone else was still focused on the stage, where the university president was now delivering his pompous, albeit well-intentioned, opening remarks, a gentle, almost hypnotic drone in the background. The only disruption, Thomas realized with a cold, clear clarity, was the two guards who had cornered him, creating a scene where absolutely none existed. Their manufactured outrage, their petty desire for control, rooted in thinly veiled bigotry, was the only real disruption in this otherwise peaceful celebration. "Officer," Thomas began, his patience forged in countless firefights, in diplomatic missions where every nuance mattered, beginning to fray dangerously at the edges, stretched thin by the blatant disrespect and targeted harassment. His voice was taut, barely controlled. "I am not causing a disruption. I am simply standing here, quietly, waiting for my son's name to be called. I am a retired Sergeant Major of the United States Marine Corps. I have served this nation with distinction for 3 decades, upholding its values, defending its freedoms, including the freedom of assembly and the right to be here without harassment. I have every right to be here and to wear this cap, which represents my unwavering service and my enduring honor. You have no legitimate reason to harass me, and you are obstructing my right to be here." Miller stepped forward slightly, his posture becoming more aggressive, a heavy hand now resting conspicuously on the sidearm holstered at his belt, a clear, unspoken threat, a menacing gesture. His eyes narrowed, a clear sign of his growing impatience and aggression, his face twisted into a sneer. "Listen, Pops," he snarled, his voice low but venomous. "We don't care who you are, or how many years you spent playing soldier. Your service means nothing to us here, today. We're telling you, you're causing a problem. You need to take off the hat, or you need to leave this building. Now, your choice. Don't make us force the issue, because we will." The implied threat of physical removal and potential arrest hung heavy in the air. The word "Pops" hung in the air like a noxious cloud, laden with condescension, a dismissive, deeply offensive jab at his age, his revered military service, and his very being. It was the straw that threatened to break the camel's back, a direct, undeniable affront to everything Thomas stood for, everything he had sacrificed for. Thomas's eyes, usually warm and filled with paternal affection, now held the unmistakable glint of tempered steel, the cold, resolute focus that had earned him the moniker Hammer in countless combat zones. It was a look that had made hardened Marines and seasoned enemies alike think twice, a silent promise of unyielding resolve. He remained motionless, his gaze unwavering, meeting Miller's challenge head-on, a granite statue of grim determination, unyielding as bedrock. He had faced down armed insurgents with less composure, navigated treacherous political landscapes with more grace and patience. This petty, discriminatory harassment was, in the grand scheme of his life, a mere inconvenience, a fleeting stain on Marcus's day, but one he would not yield to, not on principle, not for his son. "I will not remove my cap," Thomas stated, his voice dropping to a low, resonant growl, a sound that had once made entire platoons of hardened Marines snap to attention, a tone that conveyed an absolute unyielding finality, a declaration beyond argument, a line in the sand drawn. "And I will not leave this arena. My son is graduating today. I will witness it. You will not prevent me. You do not have the authority to do so, nor the justification." "That's it?" Davis barked, his face red with a mixture of frustration, impotent rage, and a desperate need to assert his flimsy authority. He aggressively reached for his radio, his fingers fumbling slightly in his uncontrolled anger, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're trespassing now, sir. This is your final warning. We'll have you escorted out in handcuffs if we have to. You don't get to disrupt this ceremony, especially not with that insubordinate attitude. You're making a scene, you're resisting, and you'll pay for it. Big time. He spat the last words, his voice vibrating with anger. A ripple of low murmurs started nearby as a few more people finally began to notice the escalating confrontation, their festive mood dissolving into uneasy concern, then outright alarm. Heads turned slowly, cautiously, a collective gasp echoing softly. Eyes, initially curious and then increasingly concerned, then a few recognizing the distinctive Marine Corps cap and the man's undeniable dignity, turned their way, the whispers growing louder, agitated. The joyous hum of the arena seemed to dim completely in their immediate vicinity, replaced by an uncomfortable growing silence, a stark contrast to the distant, muffled sounds of celebration on the stage. Marcus Henderson, just moments away from hearing his name called, his name perhaps already being announced by the stage manager as he prepared to walk across, was entirely oblivious to the quiet, ugly storm brewing at the back of the arena, where his father, a man who had served his country with honor and quietly endured countless indignities, was being publicly humiliated, his sacred moment jeopardized. Thomas felt a sharp pang, not of fear for himself, but of profound regret that this ugly display of prejudice, this blatant disrespect, was intruding on Marcus's special, well-deserved day, potentially marring a perfect memory for his son forever. Thomas stood his ground, a rock in the face of an incoming tide, immovable and defiant, his posture radiating an unwavering internal strength, a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any uniform. He wouldn't back down, not now. Not when Marcus was so close to this momentous achievement, a milestone Thomas had poured his life, his heart, and his every sacrifice into. He squared his broad shoulders, his chin slightly raised, his gaze steady, his entire being radiating a quiet strength, a granite resolve, ready for whatever came next. A lifetime of standing firm for what was right coursing through his veins. He had faced worse odds with less cause, and he would not break. Not for them, not for anyone. Just as Davis brought the radio to his lips, his mouth already open, ready to bark out a frantic call for backup, his eyes narrowed in a premature triumph, and Miller stepped even closer, his hand now visibly gripping his sidearm, the leather creaking slightly, a silent, menacing promise of escalating force. A sudden, almost imperceptible shift occurred at the main entrance, drawing the eye of anyone who truly knew how to observe, anyone who possessed that rare, heightened sense of awareness that came from years of honed vigilance. It wasn't a sudden rush, not a panicked stampede, but a controlled, deliberate, almost balletic entrance. 6 men, moving with a synchronized, fluid precision that spoke of intense, relentless training, of countless hours honed into perfect synergy, and a shared, singular, unspoken purpose, entered the arena. They weren't in any uniform. They wore impeccably tailored, dark, understated suits, charcoal grays, deep blacks, rich navy blues, that somehow, paradoxically, made their powerful, athletic frames seem even more imposing, more dangerous, more commanding. Their presence was like a physical force, a palpable wave of authority and quiet competence that instantly commanded attention, without making a sound, without a single shouted word, without a single wasted movement. Each man carried himself with an almost predatory grace, an economical movement, their eyes sharp and intelligent, like chips of polished stone, scanning the vast crowd with an unnerving, professional intensity, taking everything in, processing every detail, missing nothing. They moved as one, a silent, disciplined wedge, a living, breathing formation, cutting a path of least resistance through the sparse movement near the entrance, their focus unwavering, their destination clear and predetermined, like a guided missile. Their gaze, sharp and direct, landed squarely on the small confrontation unfolding around Sergeant Major Thomas Henderson, an almost imperceptible tightening around their eyes, a shared recognition, a silent understanding passing between them, a sudden hardening of their features. The murmuring near Thomas's position died completely, abruptly, as if a volume knob had been turned to zero. The few people who had started to pay attention to the guards' bullying, sensing the new, more significant presence, suddenly fell silent, their eyes widening in a mixture of awe and dawning comprehension, a palpable shift in the collective mood. The guards, Miller and Davis, caught entirely off guard by the abrupt, profound shift in the atmosphere, paused mid-gesture, mid-sentence, their faces draining of color as their heads swiveled towards the newcomers. A look of confusion, then dawning apprehension, then outright gut-wrenching fear washed over their features. Their bravado evaporated like mist in sunlight. They instinctively recognized a different caliber of individual, a power beyond their petty, bureaucratic authority, a presence that radiated quiet, undeniable threat. And then, almost as if a switch had been flicked, or a master conductor had lowered his baton, signaling the end of a grand symphony, the entire vast arena, with its thousands of attendees, the distant drone of the university president's speech, the rustle of programs, the shifting of feet, even the gentle hum of the ventilation system seemed to fall utterly, completely silent. It wasn't just a reduction in noise, it was a profound, almost reverent hush, a collective holding of breath, a suspension of reality itself, as if time had momentarily paused. Not a whisper, not a cough, not a rustle of clothing, not even the distant murmur of the president's voice could be heard. Just the profound, absolute quiet, broken only by the echo of their own collective breath and the measured, soft, deliberate footsteps of the approaching men, each step resonating with an unspoken weight, a silent drumbeat of consequence. The 6 men in dark suits, their faces unreadable, their expressions grimly determined, their eyes like chips of obsidian, continued their deliberate, measured approach, closing the distance with Sergeant Major Thomas Henderson. And then, one of them, the largest, his frame radiating an unmistakable aura of command and quiet menace, a man whose very presence spoke of 1,000 battles, of iron will and unwavering resolve, subtly raised a hand, a silent signal that needed no verbal translation, a gesture that commanded immediate, absolute attention. His gaze, piercing and unwavering, fixed directly on Sergeant Major Thomas Henderson, a silent acknowledgement, a mutual respect, a solemn understanding passing between 2 warriors who recognized each other across different battlefields. He was a force of nature, contained, and he had arrived, and with him, a new, undeniable chapter in the day had begun. The room was silenced. Every eye, including those of the 2 stunned security guards whose faces had now gone ghostly pale, their bravado evaporating like mist in sunlight, their earlier arrogance replaced by palpable fear, was fixed on them. The graduation ceremony, for a brief, incredibly tense moment, had ceased to exist, replaced by the profound gravity of their arrival, and the unspoken, chilling question of why they were here and what they would do